Good evening.
Okay. Hey,
Hello, Graham.
how are you?
I'm good. I'm steady,
Yeah,
pretty solid, which is good to be able to say that. I think one of our pods a while ago, it was like, "How are you?" "Yeah, I'm fine, thanks." It's like steady, I think is a good word.
steady. Yeah, I think you've used it before, actually, in one of the pods, and it is a good word. Um, it's an honest word, and it's a slightly more, it's slightly less breezy, but slightly more honest than "Yay, I'm doing good." Would be the kind of the default position. Um, I should say to all of our listeners from Moldova to Argentina that I hope you all haven't been too lost without us because we've had a week's
Mm,
break.
I agree.
But we are back and we're going nowhere. We're just going to
Good,
keep
fast.
going. We have more topics than you can possibly imagine, but we
Yeah,
are going to stick with animals for another week because animals are something we both have thought about a great deal. And I was struck by how we spent most of the time quite passionately talking about the human-animal distinction and the degree to which that holds up. And I would want to start by framing today's discussion, wherever it may end up, at least at the beginning, talking about something that I'm interested in writing about, which is the presence of animals in human life. In other words, trying
hmm
to find the ways in which, in my view at least, animals are almost universally present in pretty much everything that we do socially, right? There's not really much in our lives that doesn't at some point or another bounce off an animal. And I got some kind of very brief pointers for that, and we can just leave them or not. But I wanted to sort of talk about them very briefly. What do I mean by kind of the presence of animals in human society? Well, animal characters. The fact that whenever we talk about animals, unless we're scientists, and we endow animals with all sorts of different characteristics. And the thing that I think is interesting about that is that the reason we do it is rather than talking about people is because we don't fully understand animals. Animals are always, they have their own essence, they have their own character, they have their own physical structure. You can't tell the same story about a dog that you would tell about a dolphin or a rat or a hawk. They're all characters in themselves. They have their own intrinsic value, and they play all sorts of different roles. They're a cast for the stories we tell in various ways. So the animal character, I think, is one part of that. Secondly, the aesthetic animals are deeply, they're all beautiful in their own ways, and they all have remarkable features. The fastest moving organic mechanism is the jaw of the cuttlefish. And you can find a fascinating and wonderful fact about every animal. It will have some property. Leaf cutter ants lifting 10, 20 times their body weight, so on and so forth. Thirdly, the moral animal, the fact that animals always, well, not always, but very often function to intensify the moral stories we tell ourselves, the fables, the allegories, the fairy tales, the fears that we want to evoke and then quash. The animal in us, the idea that we have animal traits, is obviously very powerful and present as well. We describe each other very often in animalistic terms as wolves, or I was thinking of a rather profane example, so I'll leave that alone. But hawkish, doves and hawks. One of the main ways in which the Cold War was described was the foreign policy aggressors as hawks and the foreign policy diplomats as doves. So that's
Mm.
there as well. And then taxonomy, how we divide animals up, how we categorize animals in various ways. It seems to me all of this is the wallpaper for everyone's life, and I'd like us to explore it. And I'm going to throw a question at you to start this off, which hopefully leads us a bit down that path, broadly speaking, which is a nice question to ask an artist, which is, if you were given some lovely year long grant to produce a piece of work on revolving around one animal. That's the only criterion for the 200,000 grams that they'll shove in your pocket. 12 months to do the work and then produce some sort of installation. What animal would you choose?
That's good. I don't think I can answer that directly. I could probably answer it indirectly to begin with, because I was thinking when I first went to the zoo as a kid. I think going to the zoo became a kind of annual sort of thing, and I think there's something about the smell when you got close to the zoo, and there was a different sound because you heard animal things you'd never registered before. And we did it with Grace, our daughter. My mum took her to the zoo every year, and I remember thinking then the idea of a giraffe bore no resemblance to a real giraffe when you saw it, just because of its physical material. But the smell, I keep remembering. I have made work with animals. There's a piece of work that's now in Norway, which is a lot of drawings of animals that were all derived from classical Renaissance paintings. So leopards, tigers, elephants, wolves, horses, centaurs, snakes, fish. So there's a kind of aesthetic quality. The horse I find really compelling as a species, very close to dogs in a kind of way, but I don't know horses. I've never had any proximity to horses. But I feel there's certain characteristics of horses and dogs that I can certainly have had a year to engage with. That would be something. But dogs would be the obvious one, I think.
Yeah.
I don't, because it's so embodied knowledge, and I think making art without objectifying the world. So I'd have to spend, because the work I made with all the animals was like, what does a leopard look like? And so you find images of leopards in Titian paintings or you go on the internet, and then it's a more objective thing. How the hell do I make an image correspond to that? So it became like a really interesting sort of formal aesthetic thing to do, is make all these drawings of different animals. But it kind of, in a way, was just that. It stopped there. To go any
Yeah.
beyond that, I have to work beyond just the appearance thing and the knowledge I have about dogs. The thing about dogs is, because we got two dogs, as you know, I have to put the best version of myself forward all the time with the dogs. It's innate. If I'm in a really shitty mood, I have to be good to the dogs because they correspond it back. It's like, do dogs get in a bad mood? Yes, they get naughty and grumpy and a bit personal and they want to be left alone. But it's like having the best version of yourself all the time is something I really recognize, and why living with dogs, it's such an extraordinary thing, and I don't think there's been maybe 2 or 3 years in my life at odd points when I've not lived with dogs. Even when I was at art school, the house I lived in had dogs, so I kind of got sort of involved and I was there when Millie, the dog, gave birth, because the owner had gone to London the one day the bloody dog decided to give birth to all her puppies. So I was there going, what are you meant to do? But Millie, the dog, just had the knowledge. She sorted it out. I just, was like a slightly scared attendant, making sure you're all right. And of course, the dog sorted everything out.
Right.
But to make a piece of work about dogs, yeah, that would probably be the way in.
Mm,
The first thing I'd probably do, my instinct would be, is I'd probably have to sit and, like I always do, just start writing around things, just trying to kind of figure out what kind of depictions or images or narratives could you open up? And I think, yeah, that would be a really interesting process because it's
yeah,
not what the dogs look like, oh, well,
no,
I don't use any of the top ticking book of faces that I understand are just full of dog images and little short videos and everything. It's not what they look like. It's how do we? I think you said it when you were bringing everything up. It's something about our interrelationship, like any meaningful piece of cultural work, isn't just like sentimentally, narratively predictable. It's like how can you open up and share something about this? It's beautiful, complex, like any relationship you have. And then I'd have to ask because it would be my dogs. I don't think I could go out and find dogs. So you'd have to kind of in a kind of very abstract, but very importantly abstract way, get their permission. Are they up for it? do they want to be, do they want to be the subject of whatever comes out the other side?
yeah,
Which is kind of interesting because in our family, there are moments when I really don't want our dogs to be photographed. They're not like, kind of circus animals or something that perform and then you take snaps of them to share on some kind of trivial level because I don't want that doing to me. I don't want to be like some prop in somebody's narrative. So that's the only time we have little frictions is, if like, oh, let's put a hat on Marnie and see what she looks like. No, no, you can't do that. So
yeah,
dogs would be my, they'd have to be because, yeah. Did you
yeah.
did you have a equivalent if we flip the coin the other way?
Yeah, it would be. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm not surprised by your answer because I think it would be my answer as well, or at least. I mean, I didn't think about it because I kind of thought it's a good one to ask a good artist. What would I do? I have no idea. My approach to things is kind of as we've said before, more about writing, which is also what you do, but I'd be kind of start and end with the writing. But yeah, it would probably be dogs. I think if just right now, I would probably be more. I would want to start by trying to find ways of thinking about generally people's relationships with dogs because I'm living in a town, Whitstable, which is quite famously high dog density. Right,
Yeah.
when Whitstable went to Wembley and won the FA Cup Vase 2 years ago, there were
Wow.
kind of jokes on Facebook about the fact that there's now thousands of dogs roaming around Whitstable with no one to look after them. Um, and
Good.
it's true. I'm here, and it's amazingly full of dogs. And one of the things that is really just endlessly diverse and fascinating is how people relate to their dogs. Loads of people are having conversations with their dogs as they go on their walks. People are Some people are just letting their dogs run around like idiots, and some people are very kind of carefully training their dogs. Some people are feeding their dogs, some people aren't feeding their dogs. Some people have families and the dog's almost like a kid. Then there's a kind of old man who's got an old dog, and they kind of obviously live their life together. So I would probably want to explore that incredible diversity of relationships that are on public display because everyone needs to walk their dog, right?
Do you know?
And I'm
Do you
part
know?
of that. So yeah,
Do you know? Again, it's a sort of anecdotal thing that people say, oh, that the dog and the owner are a kind of mirror of each other. And once you start playfully thinking about it, and you see some, you mentioned some, elderly gentlemen with a dog, they kind of look the same in some weird way. So when I
Yeah,
think about you and your beautiful dog, there is a kind of weird symmetry between you. And
yeah.
again, our two lurcher dogs.
Well,
And I
that's
think that,
interesting because they're both quite different characters. I mean, I know them, so they're quite different characters. So they can't.
hey,
Or are they
hey,
both different
however,
facets of you?
split personality, Graham, if you
Yeah.
already know. Part of me is very tender and caring, and the other part of me is very indifferent.
Yeah.
Um, but I wanted to, um, now you've brought it up like that, I think back to this thing about going to the zoo, because, when I grew up, obviously no internet, you had kind of limited television, there was no multiple channels or anything. I mean, it's kind of very recent in a way. That going to the zoo is kind of the weirdest thing because it was the way Chester Zoo was organised was obviously to do with how certain animals need certain specific conditions. And then you go into the reptile area where obviously the temperature and everything is kept, so they're all the reptiles. They fucking freak you out. It's like, uh, and again, just seeing the sort of scale of animals that you'd heard about or seen in books, and the zoo as an idea was just like amazing. And I think I don't know enough about zoology and everything, but presumably zoos have an important function. And I know that because my sister-in-law's in Edinburgh. They have these breeding programs which, are meant to, yeah, sustainable, blah, 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 good. But as an educational thing, blimey, zoos are extraordinary. So my flip side was where we were last time. I've been going back and reading again, and
It's a
just
great.
it is. I mean, it's so imaginative. But the one thing in the preface that he writes is that there is nothing more exotic or almost incomprehensible to imagine than reality. You know, the way in which we sort of touched on Attenborough last time, the way it reveals things, probably for the first time in some cases we've ever seen certain animals, and we still don't know the full extent of what occupies our planet, is way beyond anything we can imagine. And there's something, again, about going to the zoo which really, talk about enlightenment. It just kind of opened up this whole weird new perspective, even though in retrospect I look back and think, it's problematic in some ways how the pens are very constructed, and the lions were not happy, and the elephants you could see were uh, a bit stir crazy, and so that side of it. But the other side, it's just extraordinary being able to go to one place, Chester Zoo as it was, and have animals from all over the world in this one area and physically be exposed to them, not just
Yeah,
watching telly or the internet, but actually
yeah.
physically understand what a rhinoceros smells like. Just kind
That's
of,
the thing that. Yeah, I think that's the thing that is a distinction worth kind of emphasizing. Is call it animality, right? The idea that there are photos and picture books of many animals all over the place and cartoons and all of that. And then there's the animal itself, the embodied animal, and it isn't just an image. It isn't just the stripes on a tiger, right? It's the smell of the tiger. It's the movement of the tiger. I know I can't remember the Blake poem now, but he Tiger Tiger burning bright, in
Mm.
the something of the night, what divine hand or eye did shape your fearful symmetry, or something like that. It's a wondrous representation of a tiger. It's an incredible poem, and I think what the poem does is kind of make the tiger almost an impossible being, and that's maybe arguably the case for all animals. They're kind of impossible beings. You have to wonder at the way that they move, or the speed or the strength that they have, or their own intelligences which aren't ours. The speed of them. I mean, I was watching. We have a little suet ball thing for the birds in our
Okay.
garden, and you can watch them, and it's all your average birds. It's not wondrous exotic birds. It's sparrows and robins, and occasionally seagulls and magpies. That's about it. But they're all fascinating to watch because they all have their different speeds. They all have their different strategies to eat. They all have different emotions about eating. Like some of them will just go, if that's a suet ball, yeah, you can see it. Some of them will just go bing like that, and others will kind of grab hold. The raptory kind of crow ones
Mm.
will grab hold and kind of try and wrestle the suet ball out. And in fact, it's fallen off the little thing it's hooked onto a few times. So there is, I think, with I would suggest, because it certainly is my recollection as well from visiting Whipsonade Zoo when I was a kid, was that you when you look at a giraffe on a page in a school book or a storybook, and then you see a giraffe and you see the way it moves and the fact that it has to move slowly because it is kind of an absurd construction in some ways, the amount of work the heart has to do to push the blood up to its head. And then it has a way of eating, and it smells in a particular way, and it has a particular way of moving. You there's something wondrous and kind of slightly alienating about that.
Mm.
That you have to respect the difference,
I
and it
think
is a
that's the really important bit for me is it like the classic confronting other, in the ethics debate, how we have to acknowledge ourselves, I think genuinely I can still remember being quite scared of certain animals, you know, not, I think it was just instinct. I think it was in the reptile area. I think that spooked me out. Um,
mm,
because up until then, it was like Tom and Jerry on telly. It's like animals were just like these cartoons that were like totally indisposable, but would also reform again. The number of times Tom got splattered by a steamroller and then the next minute bounced up again, or and it just created this kind of weird, well, it is false kind of idea, wasn't it? And then to encounter them as physical, to, you know,
yeah,
beings. And it also
yeah,
made me kind of think about, because I was small at the time, and even actually when we went back when Grace was born, it's something about you and it and your own scale in the world with them was interesting.
yeah,
And the only, I mean, zoos, I mean, they're not everyday animals normally, are they? You mean maybe a donkey might be in. I think I remember a donkey that you might have seen. Donkeys are quite rare to see now. But
yeah. You get those kind of urban zoos, don't you, where they have
yeah,
goats and
pigs
well,
and
yeah,
um, so this otherness was to do with real exoticness. Like the polar bear was always it's tragic kind of one. Um, And I haven't been to a zoo for a long time, but I presume now the sort of big part of zoos is an educational thing, isn't it? It must be. It
yeah.
can't,
They've changed a lot,
it can't
and at
just be like a circus,
least in
where
this
you're
country.
just showing off animals
Yeah,
from the other side of the planet to where you are. It must be educational.
Yeah, and conserve. I mean, it does have that. They went through a really rough time, zoos, and quite rightly so. Because yeah, I mean, I remember seeing animals that were clearly suffering some form of mental
Mm.
illness, rubbing
Yeah,
themselves on the side of what looked like prefabricated concrete
yeah,
in with a stagnant pool of water, and it was awful. Really, you don't think like that when you're kids somehow, but in retrospect, it was. But I think they've changed a lot, and there are these kind of conservation breeding programs, and I'm sure a lot of educational things like you look at an ocelot, and then there's a placard saying, "Did you know there's only
yeah,
12,000 ocelots left?" And so think
yeah.
about that. So I'm sure that happens. I mean, the thing that if we're sort of thinking about looking at an embodied animal and the way it moves and the way it smells and the noises it makes. The thing also that I think is I think what the pivot of that is that encounter, that human animal encounter, is that not necessarily, but quite often when you're looking at the animal is looking at you. You're
Absolutely.
looking at each other, and you're looking at each other in real time. This isn't a kind of mediation. The animal, in some sense, is seeing you in the same way that you're seeing the animal, and that's I've read it. I've seen people write about that in literature. People who work in farms have a way of describing the way cows look at them. Right? There's
Hmm.
a sort. It demands a response, and somehow you have to try and you can't, but you have to try and sort of think what is that animal seeing, and I know that with my dog, right? She there are times when she's looking at me, and I know she's trying to work out what the situation is with me.
Hmm.
Because I'm not always my best person with my dog. I am sometimes grumpy, so I'll hold my hands up to that. And she looks at me and she's trying to work out what this
Hmm.
means, right? And she'll come over and reassure me, or she'll kind of stay still, or whatever. But she's looking at me, and I can see her looking at me and trying to work something out. And you can't understand each other. That's not possible. But you are also empathizing or trying to empathize with each other, and it is a kind of it's quite difficult to put into words, that sensation of looking with particularly with the dog, who's kind of like a family member,
Hmm.
having your dog kind of look at you and sort of look at you, and know it's you, and be trying to decide, you know, what the situation is, or what they're going to do, or what in
I
some
think,
fashion what they want to communicate to you.
yeah, and it's like you said something about this recently. It's like micro gestures they pick up on, and it's facial, some of it. And I think dogs
Mm.
have got this ability to something about their eyebrows. They can imitate
Yeah,
us, up and down. Because he
yeah,
caught Muscat the other day. We were out somewhere, me and him and Marnie, and he for some reason drifted off on his own somewhere. And I turned round and there was a group of people walking up the hill over the road, and he didn't know where I was. And I saw a look in him that I haven't seen for a long time. He really looked worried.
yeah.
Ears went back, and then his ears went up, and then he was trying to do this thing. You're trying to work out which human, where have they gone, and you build this kind of language repertoire with them, with certain sounds that I knew if I made a certain sound, he would immediately lock on. So I left him for a little while, only not long, because poor lad was looking worried. And in the end, I did the whistle sound, and he immediately, his whole presence shot up. And it's these micro things that beyond language, they're a different sort of language that you build up, don't you? And
Yeah.
it's as much bodily as it is any sound linguistic thing. Um, which got me onto what you said at the beginning was, why do you think then we've invented this kind of extraordinary history of kind of using animals as kind of from derogatory terms to kind of the most narrative stand-ins for humans. I mean, a lot of it, I think growing up, used animal terms as really derogatory insults to people. But obviously all literature and cultural histories are full of, you said at the beginning something about we embody or we use animal in gestures or stand-ins for us, don't we?
Yeah,
And do you
yeah,
think what that's purely metaphorical because we can't find the right words for ourselves, but there must be something more to it. This
yeah.
animal. So where do you think that's? I mean,
I think it's intrinsic to what it is to be human. Is to involve animals in the ways in which we construct our sociabilities, and I think it happens because we do cohabit the world with animals, and we are fascinated by them, but we can't fully understand them, and so that we get left with these kind of animal essences, these kind of characteristics that animals have, which we can't, but because we are storytellers.
mhm.
If you want to say what are humans, and people have all sorts of different answers for that, you could say that we're storytellers. That's what makes us who we are.
No, I agree.
We
But
we
go on.
we have to have animals. We have to have animals there because we can't just talk about each other and what we've done and how we can create stories around that, which of course we do a lot, but we can't leave animals out because what having these fascinating and not entirely knowable cohabiting creatures around us and with us gives us is these forms of intensification, metaphor, uh, exoticization, fabulism. I mean, the Borges Coelho book is about chimeras, right? So
Yeah,
all of the animals are these hybrid fantasy animals of manticores and griffins
yeah,
and minotaurs, and things with more legs than they know what to do with, and bits of humans. It just really demonstrates, that book, how wildly stimulating animals are to the human storytelling imagination. So I think it's right that I don't think it's where the idea of animals and humans as distinct entities dissolves. There's no human society without animal characters. It's impossible to imagine, or if one does imagine it would resemble something so sterile it would end up looking quite inhuman because
yeah.
they are so present.
I agree, and I think there's something very unreliable about human beings, and we can use animals. Um, I mean, well, as you were talking, I was thinking, Marquis Smith filters all his lyrics with, and his frog-like mouth and his movement like a slug, and it's kind of lyrical, poetic thing that kind of drifts where we try and describe characteristics, human characteristics, and the animal. Yeah, I mean, I'm back to sort of Attenborough again. How that's the language of those programs has filtered culturally into our vocabulary in a way, and it's not just a visual vocabulary, but our understanding, yeah, about our innate unreliability to be certain about ourselves. And I think you're right, as you say, that drawing on the animal world allows us, yeah, to become these slightly not other things, but where we can't find the right way in. It's like I'm looking at some images just to the left of the screen here of bats, and from the most gothic reference you could think of. we're off to Dracula and we're away, aren't we? And this kind of merging between these worlds. And it goes, I mean, because the book is extraordinary, and it does go right back to very early, the most earliest kind of evidence of storytelling. And certain things are kind of inherited and then reused and over again throughout histories. And I remember as a kid, the thing about dragons, that was kind of like dragons were from castles going on holiday in North Wales to seeing dragons in biblical imagery to then wondering what the hell a dragon is all about. But then in Borgeth, he kind of threads it through how many different cultures in the world.
Mm.
And it's symbolic in a spiritual way because it is other, as well as a metaphorical and at times political metaphor, isn't it? Symbolically. Having said that, I don't watch Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, but clearly it's a very alive, active metaphor still, isn't it? The good versus evil narrative that's been with us in every culture. The evil is always these kind of animal type, strange looking characters. And of course,
Yeah.
Chloe likes to think of Haaland as an orc, an orc.
Yeah.
There is this kind of really, it's fundamental narrative, isn't it? Which is derived from, I don't want to go on about it, but the real, yeah, the thing about the good and evil, the good is often in our culture, Christian culture, the white, could be an elderly, long beard, Christian looking. And then the evil are always these kind of hybrid, sort of semi-human, animal human, that can fly or they can move at high speed, but they can die in the thousands, and you watch any of those things, as I did when Grace was growing up. The obliteration of the orcs was tragic. How many millions of orcs died, when three fucking weird elves got killed or something. So it's clearly embodied, isn't it? And my interest again, in coming back to the time I spent in North Russia was there was a thing about, because for a long time the islands are worked on, the humans were the only predators on the island. There wasn't anything animal-like apart from mosquitoes, and they had their own kind of really. I didn't understand it properly, but the mosquito was like, it was used in the prison system as a form of torture. You would be tied naked to a tree and literally eaten to death by mosquitoes. And it was like this idea that these tiny little things, were like the source of this incredible. It wasn't just a metaphor because it was real. And I remember thinking, God, our holidays in Scotland as a kid were like plagued by midges. Do you remember? Well, very
Yeah, I
well.
do remember. Painfully so. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you think
Awful.
on all sorts of different scale, it has this, what you're talking about, that we can't live, or maybe some aspects of culture like us to think we are separate, in certain capital ideas of how we function, but that's just stupid illusion, isn't it?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, it doesn't take up much of human history's large ledger book, that the idea that animals are machines that make noises, that sort of image. I forget the guy who used the phrase now, but the idea that you can kind of do vivisection on animals and they don't suffer because they're not sentient. That really is never really as sometimes people portray it, particularly animal rights people portray it as kind of like this great domineering ideological shift in modern Western societies. And of course it is there, and it's there in science for long periods of time, arguably into the present, depending on your views of
Mhm.
animal experimentation across the board. But it's never been dominant. You know, there've always been sentimental attitudes towards animals, or some animals, hypocritical though they might be, and there've always been animal rights campaigns from all sorts of different points of view, not just kind of on the left. So most of human history, I think, seems to be based on the idea that animals, or some animals, are valued and that they need to be integrated into the narratives that answer the big questions about how we can live with each other. I think the one thing that struck me when you were talking about unreliable humans is that I think that goes for animals as well. They're also unreliable, right?
Totally
If the
unpredictable.
reading I've been doing is fascinating, partly because there is no fixed animal identity, right?
Mm.
It's to take a very famous example, the rat. The rat's really present in a lot of images and a lot of discourses and a lot of storytelling. And most famously, the association of the Jews as rats
Hmm.
under during Hitler and the Nazis. That's a really prominent. That's obviously a really prominent and ugly association that was very prominent, and genocide in this in the academic literature. The idea of associating people with a certain kind of animal is seen as one of the stages
Yeah.
towards the mass destruction of a people. But there are also other. I read a remarkable. Was it a poem or a short essay by an Eastern European? I don't know if it's a German, but an Eastern European Jew about a pogrom that had taken place, and this was before the Nazis, I think, when there were all these other horrific pogroms against Jews in Europe, which are under personally think they should be more seriously understood in Europe.
Hmm.
And it's a despair. It's a despair and anger from this one Jewish writer who's talking about how the other people in his village submitted to these pogroms and kind of handed over their possessions and stood still as they were being beaten, sometimes to death. And he says we were like rats. Right, this is before the Nazis, so that's what made me really struck me. He was really angry with the lack of fight back in this village that he's talking about, where he witnessed people going from house to house, smashing in the windows and taking all the possessions and then beating up all the people inside. So the rat then becomes a figure both of this kind of sneaky, venal, invasive species, which is how the Nazis saw the Jews, and also from the point of view of this Jewish writer, a kind of mass indictment of the inability or the unwillingness of Jewish villagers to fight back against the pogroms. So all the animals I'm suggesting have this kind of floating identity. Depends what characteristics people draw out of them.
Yeah, that's
And
complicated though, Graham. And animal behavior, and I mean, again, it's a whole other podcast in a way. But as individuals, but as groups, animals, mammals, it's really, I think it is really complex about how behavior functions. And the example you mentioned about the village and everything, there is a lot of writing and study about trauma and our inability to fight or flight. But actually, how as a collective we go into this state of, I don't know the right words for this, but we literally freeze. and just follow whatever is put in front of us. And I think again it's opening up a much bigger subject there. But um, yeah, maybe there's something in that for the future. It's because I'm reading this is an extraordinary book about trauma at the moment. The writer himself, I'm not sure I like him, but it is a very good book.
Mm.
And it's a very contemporary, recent book that, like, studies of us humans and our, we'll use the word again, unreliability. There's so much just way out there. We have no notion still of, how we function and behave. But clearly, traumatic events and how our body embodies it, is still relatively recent science. And some of it in there, he does touch on these subjects which you brought up then about how we behave in a crowd. If like I've only witnessed it like in concerts where it's kicked off and it's gone horribly wrong, and suddenly you're rational. We should have done this, we should have done that. You're caught up in this thing. It's really odd. um,
Yeah.
and the thing about, you mentioned earlier about the human animal and our behavior. Yeah, there's still so much um, personally. And you think, after how many centuries millennia have we been on the planet? You'd think we'd inherit certain knowledge that we have absolutely no idea about still. You'd think we'd figured it out by now, but no, we haven't. It's kind of like,
No, that's never going to
uh,
happen.
no, of course. That's the point,
I
isn't
mean,
it?
that's kind of the. I mean, I'm thinking of maybe a smart tie-up
Hey,
with these
go.
things, because you talked about, well, you did horse and hounds at the beginning of the
Yes.
podcast. The two animals you were interested in were horses and dogs, and there's all sorts of reasons why I think those are good. Well, why they both pair up quite nicely. But then when we think about the endless unreliability of humans, there has been, since Freud kind of posed to us the idea of the id and the unspeakable parts of the subconscious, we have had a certain kind of set of languages about why humans are unreliable, that there isn't an integral individual sense of purpose and identity. We're all fractured or broken in some fashion or another, and we can't understand how we're fractured and
Mm.
broken. In the story that gets told about Freud, one of the first times that he kind of used his theoretical ideas in practice was because a boy, a father, if I remember this correctly, the father takes his boy to Freud because every time he sees a horse, a white horse, he panics. He panics and I don't know if he pisses himself or if he panics and starts crying and kind of goes into a freeze fear. And it's a very, in the literature on Freud, it's kind of like used as a very sort of a formative case for Freud's theory, that he kind of uses, rather than treating the horse as an animal that might threaten a boy and saying, why are you scared of the horse, he can't attack you, he uses the symbolisms that we now associate with Freud's psychotherapy to say, what does the horse represent?
Hmm.
And in the process then to talk, give a narrative, I can't remember what it is now, but a
Mm.
narrative about what the horse represents, obviously in relation to his father. So yeah, I mean, the unreliability of humans is a permanent condition of what it is to be a human. And again, the
We,
symbolism of the animal
we should add
is
in
there.
the unreliability of animals and humans then,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
and see it very much as it's like an interrelated thing, and you touched on, if you think about PETA, isn't it, who are the animal rights people. And I have nothing against PETA at all, but humans are way worse at what they do to other humans. I mean,
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of PETA, to be honest. I think they
humans,
they're
what
bonkers.
they're capable of doing to other humans, I think exceeds anything, ultimately, as we know, as we speak, sadly.
Yeah.
Um, no, there's been some
Shit.
really, so, I mean, maybe as on a cheery, not quite so cheery note,
Yeah, that was me with my
there's a lot
happy
of,
horse story, and you've gone back to
I
genocide.
know,
Jesus.
yeah, because of the stories about cats in Gaza. There's, I don't know, just picked up things over the last 18 months, 2 years about the cats in Gaza and how they're coping. In a way that
Right.
how animals coped in Chernobyl, and completely rewilded Chernobyl
Yeah, yeah,
on the
went feral,
side.
didn't they?
Yeah, but then they sorted it out, didn't they? As much as we know, and all these animal groups are going in now and observing how they've completely reordered the whole place and restructured it in terms of hierarchies of existence. And so I
Yeah,
think there's something there for us to put in our pipes and smoke at the end of the day and not look upon animals in such a patronizing way that sadly I think a lot of people do.
yeah. Well, my dog likes being patronised. He's a good girl. Come on, he's a good
Graham,
girl.
I think it's the other way around. She's
I'm not a girl, I'm an adult dog.
no, she's looking at you going, I'll just let him keep thinking that at the moment. Jesus Christ, what a twat.
Yeah, yeah, you're right
Good.
there. Yeah, that was good, wasn't it? Yeah, we've done animals. We've done them all. We've gone through them all, and I think
But it's
they,
it's leaked out into another series of things I think we have to,
yeah,
but that's for us to discuss and present to our,
it is.
and whether we're now going to get sponsorship from Penguin.
Penguin, yeah, kind of series, a podcast series,
Yeah, sponsored by Penguin.
sponsored by Penguin, who is of course an animal. And what's the other sister publisher? The Penguin is Pelican.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And then
Actually, this is vintage,
what's
not
that other
Penguin.
one? Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah, there's that other Swan, something Swan, really big
yeah,
publisher. There's another. I mean, they're just there. That's the thing. They're just there all the time.
yeah.
Somehow or the other, the animal, it just is there. It's just there all the time.
Okay,
Even
good.
in Biscuit. Yeah. So yeah, it's a pleasure as always. We've come
Yep.
to the
See you
end of
next time.
our time, and yeah, so all power to you.
Adieu.
Until next time. Good.